Last year, the Ravens saw one of the largest shakeups of any team around the league, losing several key players and coaches. And while that doesn't seem to be the case for this upcoming offseason, there are still more than a few players who may have already played their last game in purple and black. With the Ravens' offensive coordinator Todd Monken being extended, we may be in for one of the least tumultuous but important offseasons in recent Ravens history. Let's take a look at a list of some players that may not play in the 2025 season as part of the Ravens roster. This list is, of course, not concrete, and the reasons for a player not being a Raven next year could be due to performance, contract, or simply too much competition at their position. Without further ado, let's get to it. Welcome in, everyone. This is Jordan with Ravens Flash Report. Go ahead and like the video if you agree with some of these player placements. Subscribe if you're new, and as always, put your thoughts on what players you think could be suiting up for another squad in 2025 and why down in the comments section below. These aren't in any particular order, but let's get some of the more expected or obvious ones out of the way to start things off. Number 1, safety Marcus Williams. Yes, the dead money is still there, and I have heard some people say, if you're going to pay him anyway, just keep him as a backup, and I hear you. But there are only so many spots on the active roster, and if the Ravens are benching Williams for nearly every game, which they did in the latter part of the season, I don't see them using a highly coveted place on the roster for him. So Williams is likely gone, and whether it was injuries or his subpar play, this will unfortunately go down as one of the worst free agent acquisitions of EDC's time as GM. Number 2, Broderick Washington. This one's 50-50 for me, as I think Washington is a solid player and doesn't break the bank. But with guys like Travis Jones and Nnamdi Madubuike clearly the guys in front on the depth chart and snap count, the decision to keep Washington may come down to whether Michael Pierce runs it back with the rest of the team and or we don't go get a defensive tackle in the first 3 rounds of this year's draft. With many other players to still extend, and 2024 being a somewhat down year statistically for Broderick, there may be other players who the Ravens deem more worthy of allocating money and cap space to in 2025. Number 3, trial players. Wide receiver Deontay Hardy, wide receiver Malik Cunningham, and cornerback Tre'Davious White. All 3 of these players were low risk and potentially high reward, but I think based on the returns, it's time to move on from these players. Hardy wasn't healthy, and even when he played, he didn't lock the spot up or anything. We never saw Cunningham, and frankly, with how our offense was playing last year, I don't think we need to see him. And finally, White played fairly well in a rotation between him and Stevens, especially in the red zone, but let's face it, he's not a starting corner in the league anymore, and was simply a rental for the season. Depending on what White is asking for, and what type of deal the Ravens would get out of him, he's the only one that I would realistically want back from this trio. Number 4, quarterback Josh Johnson. Luckily for the Ravens, Lamar Jackson played in all 17 regular season games and the 2 postseason games as well. And even though we didn't win it all this year, I can't say that we would have gotten anywhere near as far with Johnson under center for any length of time. Teams typically don't go on a Super Bowl run with a backup, and I get that. But Johnson turns 39 years old in May, and even if Devin Leary isn't the fit next year as Lamar's immediate reliever, we can't kid ourselves into thinking Johnson is the most viable option either at this point. Number 5, wide receiver Nelson Agholor. Agholor was a good piece in 2023 to help fill the gaps between Bateman, Flowers, and Beckham. But between age, his low production in 2024, and other available options at the position, I doubt that Agholor has a roster spot in 2025. Between the second Bengals game and the Buffalo divisional game, Agholor recorded just 3 receptions on 7 targets for 57 yards and 1 touchdown. For a comparison, Tylan Wallace, over that same span, recorded 11 receptions on 12 targets for 210 yards and a touchdown. Number 6, offensive linemen Ben Cleveland and Patrick McCarry. Cleveland's way onto the roster was at either guard spot or backup center, and while he has been a decent backup center in a pinch, I doubt that the Ravens brass bring him back just to disappoint the coaching staff again in 2025 when they clearly prefer almost any other option. McCarry, as last year's starting left guard, clearly has more of a case to be brought back, but with Andrew Voorhees on a rookie deal, I don't believe that he's with the Ravens again in 2025. The only way that I see that happening is if he's willing to take 6th man money again, but I wouldn't be surprised to see another team pay him starting guard money after he played well enough for all 17 games last year. Number 7, cornerbacks Jalen Armour-Davis, Arthur Millette, and Brandon Stevens. What to do with these three corners? Do we bring them all back? Are any of them brought back? Unfortunately for JAD, I feel like this training camp is the end of his rope, and although he has shown some flashes when healthy, that health is few and far between. As they say, your best ability is availability, and Jalen Armour-Davis has next to no availability, missing 32 of the 51 games the Ravens have played since drafting him in 2022. He's only started in 3 of those games, and he's been on IR at least once every year that he's been here. Arthur Millette was unfortunately also not very available in 2024, as he started the year on IR, came back and played well in weeks 8, 9, and 10, but ultimately landed back on IR again, which ended his season. Unlike with JAD, however, we haven't seen just flashes from Millette. We've seen consistent high-level play in 2023 and in the 3 games that he played in 2024. With his contract up at the end of 2025 and his cap hit less than 1% of our total amount, I think it's fair to say that we see Millette at full strength this year, and I suspect we will need him. Brandon Stevens, on the other hand, had what most fans would call a poor showing in 2024, coming off of a Pro Bowl-worthy year in 2023. With Stevens being an unrestricted free agent, there is certainly no guarantee that we sign him this offseason, especially if he's seeking a contract worthy of a starting-level outside corner. My guess is that some teams will outbid the Ravens for him simply for the potential that he showed in 2023, but he may be willing to take less to return to the Ravens for a short-term prove-it deal. With Chuck Pagano back in the building as the senior secondary coach, there may yet still be some hope for a return to form for Brandon Stevens, if the Ravens are willing to take the risk. Lastly, number 8. Left tackle Ronnie Stanley, cornerback Marlon Humphrey, and tight end Mark Andrews. No, they're not going anywhere, and nor should they. Ronnie needs to be brought back for at least another year, in my opinion. Even if the Ravens go out and get an offensive tackle in this year's draft, I don't want to see Lamar's blind side protected by a rookie in 2025. Even if the plan is to move Rosengarten over to the left, which I'm not 100% sold on just yet, I still think the Ravens would find the most success replacing Ronnie by drafting a guy this year and letting him sit for a year behind an all-pro left tackle, who by all accounts had a great year in 2024. And for that 5% of the fan base that think Ronnie is signing elsewhere, you can forget it. He's pretty much declared he wants to be a Raven for life with his massive contract restructuring and pay cut last offseason, and that's all the proof that I need. Marlon Humphrey was literally the best corner on the team in 2024 and had his second first-team All-Pro season. Plus, our depth kind of sucks. As many of you know, Marlon Humphrey is my favorite Raven, and last offseason, I was on my hilltop fighting for this man's credibility and telling all the doubters how wrong they were. On the left of your screen now are Marlon's advanced game logs from his All-Pro 2019 season, and on the right are the advanced game logs from his All-Pro 2024 season. Although he allowed 116 more yards, a 2.4% higher completion percentage, and averaged 1 more yard per reception, he was targeted more, and nearly every other metric is as good or better than his 2019 season. He had 3 more interceptions in 2024, as well as his first pick 6, the same number of touchdowns given up at 3, and not a single one of them after week 5, mind you. A nearly sub-60 passer rating allowed with only 2 games over 100 all season. More quarterback knockdowns and pressures, including half a sack, and he cut his missed tackles down to 6, while being 5th on the team in total tackles. So, once again, I'm ready for any fan of any team to come at my boy Marlo this offseason. Lastly, we have Mark Andrews, who scored 11 touchdowns, caught 80% of his targets, and averaged over 12 yards per reception, all while having the lowest receptions per game since he was a rookie. So this online overreaction needs to stop, and the people at the end of the bar need to quiet down a bit. Let's not only take a look at how Mark Andrews, the Ravens franchise leader in receiving touchdowns, has impacted the Ravens this season, though. Let's compare him to some of the other most productive tight ends around the league. I've chosen 15 tight ends who have played in at least 15 games for the sake of sample size, and this comparison argument will, I believe, hopefully help some of you naysayers and fence-sitting Mandrews fans realize how overly reactive your cut Andrews takes are. Of these 15, Mark is not only the leader in touchdowns, having 3 more than second place, but also 9th in total yardage, 3rd in yards per reception, 7th in first downs gained, 2nd in receiving success rate. If you aren't sure what that stat means, I've left the description up here so you can pause and read it yourself. Tied for 1st with the longest reception, 3rd in catch percentage, 3rd in yards per target, and one of half the group having 0 fumbles during the regular season. All of this, and he is 14th out of 15 in targets, ahead of only Isaiah Likely. So basically, you guys can miss me with the Andrews is washed arguments. They hold water like a bucket with no bottom. The Ravens offseason will see turnover as it does every season, but with the re-signing of Todd Monken, as well as the production and improvements from both the offense and defense, it really feels like the window for Lamar Jackson's era is at an absolute zenith. If we want to get the most out of guys like Derrick Henry, Marlon Humphrey, Zay Flowers, Kyle Hamilton, and of course Lamar Jackson, this 2025 offseason and its corresponding roster moves may be one of, if not the most important of the franchise history. If you guys enjoyed this breakdown of which players may have played their last game for the Ravens and those that should be retained, give the video a like. If you're new around here, go ahead and subscribe, and don't forget to turn notifications on because we're going to have a lot to get into as we prepare to head into the 2025 offseason. Also, put your thoughts on the team's upcoming roster moves and or your hot takes on what they should do to get over their playoff hump down in the comment section below. As always, guys, stay safe out there. Go Ravens.